Hey there! It is good to have you back. Today, I want to talk about one of the most fundamental concepts of artificial intelligence with you. I want to talk about classification. And one of the most basic forms of this idea is called logistic regression. The big idea is that we want our AI to learn whether something belongs to a class or not. And to give you an example why this is useful, imagine you're a zookeeper and you are happy about each and every customer. But lately, the cats are always making a mess in your zoo when they visit you. So you decide to not allow any cat in your zoo for a month. This way, they hopefully think about their behavior. The problem is, the cats are clever and they disguise themselves with glasses and coats. Now, we want to train an AI to detect the cats among all our customers. And someone told you that logistic regression is an easy way to do that. Normally, you would use computer vision for that, but the zoo does not have any cameras. But don't you worry, I will make a video about computer vision soon. Our AI today will detect the cats by checking different, typical features of a cat. So, features like huge eyes, shiny fur, pointed ears, 4 paws, independent attitude, etc. And the more features there are, the more likely it is to be a cat. This way, our AI will be able to detect the cats. But before delving too deeply into this example, let's talk about the foundations together. Just like in my last video about linear regression, let's start with the name's meaning. Regression is a technique from statistics where we relate 2 variables to each other. I already explained this part in my other video, so feel free to look it up. Logistic, on the other hand, goes back to the so-called logistic function. Watch, this is what it looks like. Its inventor thought of it as an easy way to describe population growth. He said that the rate of reproduction is proportional to both the existing population and the amount of available resources. That means the more people we have, the more children we will bear, as long as we can feed them. Nowadays, this function is better known because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this era, the infections could be modeled by the exponential nature of this function. That means the more people are infected, the more people will be infected until there are not enough people left anymore to get infected. And to show you that this actually was a viable model for the pandemic, let's look at this. Here we see a real model where scientists compared their predictions to the observed cases. Impressive, isn't it? They were able to predict the future with some mathematical knowledge. But if you lived through the pandemic, I'm pretty sure you do not want to talk about that again. Hopefully, this gives you an idea where the function is coming from and why it is useful. Okay, that means that logistic regression relates 2 variables to each other via this logistic function. Only in our case, we will not describe growth, but probability. I do not want to annoy you with the mathematical background here, but the takeaway is, instead of measuring populations over time, we now measure how likely it is for something to happen. An accessible example would be the probability of passing an exam after different hours of studying. We see that the more hours we invest in studying, the more likely we are to pass. Pretty obvious, isn't it? But the interesting part is that there's no linear relationship between the hours. That means between 1 and 2 hours, there's practically no difference in the probability of success. The same does apply for 5 hours and 6. But watch the magic happen between 2 and 4 hours. It jumps from almost nothing to almost verified success. Of course, this is just an example for a specific exam. This does not apply in general. But it illustrates that in many cases there's a sweet spot where growth becomes exponential. This continues until a saturation point and then it stagnates. And if I now tell you that with more data we can make this sweet spot even steeper, you may start to understand why this is a powerful basis for artificial intelligence. If not, let me explain it in more detail. The notion of our AI today is to look at data and decide to which class it belongs. Without knowing anything about the data, that is nearly impossible. But if we give our AI enough information to process, it begins to learn how to distinguish between the classes, to the point where it has a clear understanding where to draw the line, quite literally. This line is called the decision threshold, and we can move it forward and backward. Moving it will have different benefits and downsides, but more on that later. Alright, that was all quite theoretical, but how does it actually work? It all starts with us thinking, well, a logistic regression might be useful here. Let's try it out. Then we give our AI some examples. A student who did not learn and did not pass. A student that learned a lot and did pass. And this will give our AI already a rough idea what the probabilities might look like. We still see that there's a lot of uncertainty between 2 and 4 hours. So let's quickly move on. Now we add a few students who studied a bit and did not succeed. And some students that studied less than our current best, but still succeeded. From these, the AI learns that the cut needs to be harsher. The decision line becomes clearer. Now we add more students with varying hours spent. And the point of distinction becomes even clearer. This can go on until we ideally find a sweet spot so steep that there's hardly an in-between anymore. Without an in-between, few cases are left where we are not completely sure. And that means that we can trust in our AI to decide correctly. But normally you will find outliers or the distinction is not as clear as we would wish it to be. So this is more or less an ideal example. Nonetheless, it gives us a good intuition how a logistic regression learns from input data. In our zoo example, our AI would learn that around 3 cat features, a customer is becoming very likely to be a cat. Below 3, we might still confuse it with another animal, but starting from 3, we can be pretty sure it is a cat. Of course, we can apply this to almost anything where we want to categorize input into different classes. Common use cases are also fraud detection, churn prediction, or, as we have seen, disease prediction. The challenge for us is always to find metrics that make sense and lead to good results. Looking for cat-like features in an animal can make sense. Comparing the number of legs or the presence of a tail does not really help so much. So we see one of the main challenges is interpreting our results. And to do this efficiently, let's take a look at some metrics to evaluate our results. The first thing we have to understand is the difference between false and true positives and negatives. Let me give you another example. In Colombia, there are to this day still countless mines buried in the ground. With technological progress, we can nowadays scan the earth and let an AI evaluate whether there's a mine beneath it or not. If there's a mine and our AI detects it, this is called a true positive. Positive because our AI is sure there's something, and true because it is right. If there's no mine and the AI also does not detect any, this is called a true negative. Our AI does not detect anything, and that is actually what it is supposed to do. Until now, that sounds pretty reasonable, don't you think? Unfortunately, we are now talking about the critical aspects. If there is no mind, but our AI insists on detecting one, we call that a false positive. It is sure about it, hence the positive, but that is not sure at all, hence the false. And the reverse situation, there is a mind and our AI does not detect it, is called false negative. In this case, this is the most dire situation. We assume safety, but it is actually the opposite. And with this example, you do understand why the false negative is by far the most important metric to keep in mind most of the time. Because we can risk human lives if we do not minimize this metric as much as possible. There are other examples like cancer detection or false conviction. In each of these cases, the false negative has to be as small as possible for us to trust in the decision of our AI. But the other way is sometimes preferable too. There are also cases where you have to worry more about the false positives. Like an alert that rings too often and no one pays attention anymore. Or when parts of a machine are replaced unnecessarily. We see, it all depends on your use case, and we always have to choose one of them to focus on. But once we've got this covered, we can take advanced metrics into consideration too. For starters, we display these 4 metrics in a different way. This is called a confusion matrix. It shows us vividly how our numbers are connected. Then we take further steps to visualize the upcoming metrics. The first steps is to calculate 2 more abstract metrics, the precision and the recall. Let's start with the precision. We want to know how often our AI is right with its positive prediction. So we take all the positive predictions and divide them by the correctly predicted positives. This helps us to identify if our AI just says positive every time and thus making it worthless, or if it is actually working really well. The other metric is the recall, also known as the hit rate or the sensitivity. This metric indicates how many of all the positive cases are predicted as positives. It can be interpreted as the accuracy of our AI. With these two, we can visualize the performance of our AI in 2 prominent ways. The first one is the Precision-Recall-Tradeoff. It can be obtained by running the classification with different decision thresholds. It shows that high precision and high recall are not possible at the same time. We have to focus on one. A common strategy to pick a decision threshold that is a good trade-off is the following method. We start on the leftmost point. It has highest precision. Move along the curve and stop just before the curve descends steeply. This is always a good choice if the positive class is aware, or when we care more about the false positives than the false negatives. The other visualization is the receiver operating characteristics, the RRC curve. It is a plot of the recall rate against the rate of false positives, the false alarm rate. The identity line in the middle indicates random guessing. The line above, with the colorful dots, is the RRC curve. The further away the RRC curve is from the identity line, the better the performance of the classifier. The lower triangle is excluded, because performance in this area would indicate that the AI knows the answers, but decides to answer falsely. To compare different classification AIs, it is common to measure the area under the curve, the AUC. The higher it is, the better. The maximum would be AUC equals 1. That would look like this. Normally, we would see different plots in the same graph to compare them. Look! Now we could calculate the AUC of both of them and compare the values to choose the best classifier. But with this visualization, we do not need to calculate. We just take a look and think, yes, the green one is the optimal choice. Okay, that was a lot of information. We talked about true, false, positive, negative, precision, and recall. And based on that, two visual ways of thinking of it, the Precision-Recall-Tradeoff and the RRC curve. If you now think, I don't really feel like understanding all that, don't worry. Most of the time, your programming framework takes care of all that. What matters is that you know how to interpret these names and graphs. Just think about which metric is the important one for you and use a graph to decide the details then. With time, all the details will start to make more sense and you will become more confident. And at that point, we can continue to talk about multi-class classification, one versus one, one versus all. But that is a topic for another video. We call it a day at this point. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, take a look at my other videos. Until the next one, I wish you all the best. Bye!